Aristotle is one of the most important names in the history of philosophy. Along with Socrates and Plato, he became one of the leading personalities of all time. His thought has survived the test of time, reaching the present day and displaying all its splendor. His works continue to be studied, debated, and influential. Aristotle, like his predecessors Socrates and Plato, is a major thinker in the history of philosophy. However, unlike the other two, he was not an Athenian. He was born around 384 BC in Stygira in Thrace, now a city in the Chalcidian region. His father was Nicomachus, a talented and renowned physician who worked for the Macedonian royal family. The famous historian Diogenes Laertius described Aristotle as someone with a whispered speech. His legs were very thin and his eyes small, but he dressed extravagantly and combed his hair carefully. Aristotle grew up in a privileged financial situation. During his childhood and youth, the philosopher from Stygira received a good education, and when he was between 16 and 17 years old, he was sent to Athens to study at the academy with Plato, who was already around 70 years old. He stayed there and studied for almost 20 years, leaving the city only after his master's death. Following Plato's passing, the academy was inherited by his nephew Speusippus, who placed great emphasis on the teaching of mathematics, much to Aristotle's chagrin. Aristotle, despite being Plato's disciple, developed a philosophical thought that differed in many ways from that of his master. He was even overly critical of various aspects of Platonic philosophy. These disagreements can be seen in Aristotelian metaphysics, which differed from that of the master of the academy, based on a sensible world and a suprasensible world. Another particularity in Aristotle's special interest and attention to the empirical sciences, something we cannot see in Plato's works. But Aristotle's legacy is distinguished by major inquiries into nature. The philosopher moved to Aternius, a Greek colony in Asia Minor. This time was particularly important in Aristotle's life, as he met Pythias, niece of King Hermias of Aternius, whom he married and had a prosperous relationship with. The philosopher once wrote that, after dying, he would have liked to be buried with his beloved. In 348 BC, he lived for a period in Assos and then in Mytilene, the capital of the island of Lesbos. Aristotle's time there was particularly notable for his intense studies into biology and careful observation of nature. In Lesbos, he eagerly studied marine life, and in Assos, he even opened an academy, where he led research into biology. One of the great landmarks of Aristotle's work is that it pioneered the detailed study and systematic classification of certain species. The philosopher is said to have dissected some animals to study them more thoroughly. He compared and observed life forms in nature in an unprecedented way. His collaborations were so important that today it is difficult, and even unfair, to talk about the history of science without mentioning Aristotle. In 343 BC, Aristotle was called to join the court of King Philip II of Macedon, becoming tutor to the 13-year-old Alexander, the king's son, who would one day become Alexander the Great, one of the most famous figures in history. Plutarch tells us that, at least for a certain period, the young Alexander became attached to the philosopher tutor and had a profound respect for him, viewing him as a true father. Aristotle taught the young heir to the Macedon throne various subjects, and his instructions were extremely important in Alexander's life. The philosopher held this position for 3 years, and then returned to his hometown of Stygira, where he lived from 340 to 335 BC, eventually moving to Athens and lived there until 323 BC. In 335 BC, on the outskirts of Athens, Aristotle founded the philosophical school called Lyceum, named after the word Lykios, because the school was in an area dedicated to Apollo, known as Lykios or Lyceum. Aristotle had many students and debated different areas of knowledge with them. Some notable personalities studied with him, including the philosophers Aristoxenus of Tarentum, Critolus, Strato of Lampsacus, and many others. The Lyceum became known as the Peripatetic School, and its students came to be called Peripatetics. The word peripatetic comes from Greek and can be translated as strolling or walking. The origin lies in the fact that Aristotle's classes took place during garden walks, during which he and his students engaged in philosophical reflections and debates. In 323 BC, Alexander the Great died. This sparked an anti-Macedonian reaction among the Athenians, and accusations were leveled against Aristotle, Alexander's former tutor. For safety reasons, the philosopher left the city and moved to Chalkis, on the Greek island of Euboea. Aristotle said that he had left Athens to not let philosophy be wronged twice, clearly referring to Socrates' fate, another notable Greek philosopher, whose practice was rejected by some of his contemporaries who accused, condemned, and killed him. The archaeological discovery of the Lyceum is recent, having taken place in 1996. The site was accidentally found in the center of Athens, just behind the Greek Parliament, during excavations to build a modern art museum. Since 2009, the Lyceum has been available to the public. It opens every day and charges a small fee to visitors. When we study this great Greek philosopher, we find a division in his writings, made in antiquity by some scholars who considered that Aristotle produced texts especially to be read by the public, the so-called exoteric writings, and also technical texts, known as esoteric writings, prepared by the philosopher for use in the Lyceum. Unfortunately, almost all of the contents of the first category have been lost over time, although many of his vast productions have come down to us. During the Middle Ages, philosophers once again focused on Aristotelianism during the so-called Islamic philosophy or Arab philosophy. One of the leading figures in Arabic philosophy, who shaped the entire context of medieval philosophy, was Averroes, a notable Muslim philosopher and physician. He was a great scholar of Aristotle's philosophy. His annotations on the Greek thinker's work helped to awaken interest in Aristotelian thought in the Middle Ages. We can also mention Al-Ghazali and Avicenna, outstanding Arab philosophical personalities who were also inspired by Aristotle's studies. Apart from the influence and visibility that Aristotelian philosophy had at that time, his work lived on after this historical period, inspiring great personalities, including two illustrious men, the Polish Nicolaus Copernicus and the Italian Galileo Galilei. The latter disagreed with and challenged Aristotelian physics. Besides these two renowned personalities, Darwin wrote the following words: "Linnaeus and Cuvier have been my two gods, though in very different ways, but they were mere schoolboys to old Aristotle." In his writings, Aristotle addresses multiple areas of study, such as metaphysics, ethics, politics, logic, zoology, mathematics, art, among others. In general, through his documents and their vast thematic scope, the philosopher ended up contributing to many areas of knowledge beyond philosophy. In 2016, during the 2,400 Years of Aristotle World Congress, a group of Greek archaeologists claimed to have found Aristotle's tomb in Stagira, the place where the thinker was born. Although without any definitive proof, the evidence was strong and the team seemed confident of their discovery. The site where the archaeologists said they had found the tomb contains descriptions similar to the information found in some official documents that mention the death and burial of Aristotle's ashes. The evidence found in the excavations is powerful proof that this was the thinker's tomb, but it is not yet certain whether this was the illustrious philosopher's final resting place or not. Aristotle was one of the world's most famous thinkers, and his philosophical legacy still fascinates and attracts the attention of many. He remains a highly respected personality whose work is of enormous significance to the history of philosophy.